can't turn your head away from this, because essentially is the better psychopath wins.
Or now, who has the most money in some cases.
Or who has the most resources, and as far as that. But yet, what's happened is that we've got this 1% in fact, it's less than 1% that are literally controlling everything, and I believe they're actually being controlled at certain levels to this other these other forces, of which I have not been able to identify. But I just assume that there's somebody else pulling the strings here. But again, I think that the best thing that we can do is by keep on identifying these things. Basically mentioning, well, I mean, when you bring up Roswell, which that's the craziest, most ridiculous thing that ever happened. I mean, there's a litany of people, witnesses, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing is the space astronauts. Most all of them, of course, they signed disclosure agreements saying that they won't come out, which a lot of them have ignored.
Yeah, John Glenn.
But if you get right, but you get them in, and now you get them, and they basically, most of them openly admit it. As far as that. So now we're in that place, and this is a very weird, strange place where, it's like I guess it's apathy might be a word, that as long as I have mine, that I don't care about any of these other broader or bigger issues, and that scares me. And I think I believe has been reflective of technology.
And brainwashing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're doing the same thing. I mean, I watched, for instance, 2001's Space Odyssey, with the HAL 9000, which is great. And the reason I watched it was because I was sitting in amazement of all the bots this last week selling all these shares and basically ignoring anybody's direction to do anything else other than sell, because because they've been able to assimilate all this information and in so many different ways, and calculate that that was the time to sell.
Well, you know what?
Selling and keep selling.
You were in the financial market, and this is what I've asked bankers in the past, and they really couldn't answer the question. And you know what it is? There's nothing backing up any of the currency. How can you make money up or financial just on numbers? So how can a stock market crash if there's nothing really there? There's nothing there realistically.
No, there isn't. The other thing, too, is like Enron, and of course they came out with this where they would actually book assets based on, a certain value 5 years from then in the future. Well, Enron, I'm an analyst, and so I look at all this stuff, and I couldn't figure out what they did to make a living. And I'm in the oil and gas business. I actually owned gas fields. I actually owned pipelines. I actually knew people in the company, but I couldn't figure out how they made their money. And what they did was they booked assets that weren't there, and they were allowed to do it. They had a special deal, and people like lemmings, because everyone said it was a good deal, they kept on saying until it wasn't. And a lot of the stuff too, and I think a lot of the puffery we've got here in the markets, and of course everyone worships the technology god. I'm trying to come to grips with a lot of it, because I mean, although apparently there's value, and of course we were talking about Bill Gates and disoperating system. And when that came out, well, that was a mechanism or a platform everyone could use, or utility there, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Well, you get all this other stuff, which is really grandiose fluff, and it, I mean, I get that part, and barely, because I'm not a techie. I mean, we were fully computerized in 1989. 1989, we had an IBM, I think 286, and we were the, we thought we were really somebody.
Oh yeah.
And, as far as that.
That's sure. Was a lot better computer than the XT. It didn't have
XT.
Yeah. Or some CPM machines before that.
But my point is that I mean, so I came kind of, even though I was I've been around it. I'm not of the caliber of some of these other, great minds and programmers and things like that. But what we've seen, but a lot of this stuff is these add-on or and the United States right now, we don't manufacture very much anymore.
No.
We don't make things anymore. And apparently we've done really well at bamboozling the whole concept and getting paid for it. Now, I kind of like everything works till it doesn't. And even like the markets, they seem to, work until they don't. And now we're coming into the don't factor. And so that's kind of where we're at right now. But anyways, we'll see. But again, I mean, I'm hopeful that there is a certain amount of benevolence out there, and I know we're being watched. And I think that this whole Earth, with they call it the ocean planet. 70% of our planet is water, and there's every natural resource you could ever want here.
Uh-huh.
So I think the intrinsic value of this place, and I think that's another reason why in these you hear in these silos where literally nuclear weapons get turned off, and mysteriously get turned off, and the accidents don't happen. So apparently there is some benevolence here, because otherwise we would have been destroyed 10 times over. With some of the nuclear capabilities. So I think there's something there. At least I hope there is. And so consequently, I have to keep that faith, and I also have to believe that if there are walk-ins to the negative, because apparently they're people do atrocious things, and I often wondered why. And kind of the spur of the moment, and then of course they end up either on the in the gas chamber, or they end up incarcerated for whatever. And there's a lot of people that make these monumental mistakes, and I kind of think that there's some evil either and you call it alien or demonic alien. I don't know the difference between people in this super sensible world. They talk about angels, and I think the whole Bible is filled with references to extraterrestrials, all the way from Ezekiel's will to the Apostle Paul, all of this stuff.
Well, let's face it, we're going back to cavemen or about that, and working up in the caves. I mean, how can I say it? They weren't intelligent enough to be able to draw a man with a helmet and then draw spaceships, on the cave walls. How would they even comprehend flying machines back then? They had to have seen something. Something was going on. And I think we've been visited right from the very start. And I think we are right now. I hate to say it. I think there's a lot more going on than a lot of people would ever imagine. And let's move on to a little bit more, because we got about 20 more minutes. I would like to go on more about your experience with UFOs. I want to ask you one question. What did the Greys look like that, examined you? What were their features like?
Well, the features were, of course, they were the small Greys, and their height was between 3 and 4 feet, tall, and they had very elongated heads, and and the scent of their skin almost smelled like, I guess it had this is all sense. It's more like a dolphin, or it was a very weird texture as far as that. Their eyes were very, very piercing and penetrating. They actually communicated with their eyes, and that's why they didn't speak. They didn't have mouths, but they communicated telepathically, predominantly through their eyes. They actually would look at you in that way. They were all in uniforms. They were dressed the same way, and they were just busy little creatures. As far as that, the Greys were my only experience. I never experienced any of the Nordic or although my uncle did, and other people, the Nordics or the tall blondes and what have you, or the Venusian style, thing. I never had any experience. I just had the experience with them as far as that, and it was kind of an extraordinary event from that, because I had never, up until that time, I had never known. It was terrifying because I didn't know of any of that event happening. So that's essentially it. And it was so, I guess it was even though I was. It's happened so quick. It was like the time that I was on the table, it was almost as quickly it wasn't an elongated time. It was like very, very rapid, or at least in my mind, I was being trained or programmed to have it happen on a very, very quick scale. And I was back, and I was back where I was at. But unlike a lot of other people who go into regression therapy, which I have, I remember them like it's yesterday. In fact, whenever I talk about the grays, I start to sweat. There's an actual skin response, because for some reason it just it's imbued in me as far as that goes. But
well, see what you went through honestly would be enough to make me doubt everything that it goes on, because here you experienced it and you went through it. And not just once, but numerous times. But then you have a government, say they don't exist. But you've seen it, and you're not the only one it's happened to. It's happened to a lot of people out there. And, and once you've seen it yourself, okay, it would make, if it happened to me, one, I'd be scared, pardon my expression, shitless for the rest of my life. Two is I wouldn't believe anything I hear on the news, and I wouldn't believe anything the government says, because you would know what's going on, and something's going on, and why in the hell wouldn't the government deny it? Okay, and this is like Barney Hill and his wife. Okay, they made him to look like a total nutcase.
Oh yeah.
And it's just, that's what, it just astounds me. How tall were they? I mean, they're
like around 3 feet. Yeah, they're around 3 feet, 3 feet and a half. It would be more precise, as far as that. They were very, very short and very, very fine features as far as hands go. And very thin arms, and what have you, but elongated heads. This almost looks like something coming out of the ancient pyramid, where they have those, big crowns, as far as a very, very large back of their heads that go up almost kind of like a beehive that go in the back. But I almost looked at, you get the whole, I guess, insect effect, where you're kind of looking at them as far as that. And but yeah, that was. But yeah, that's it. That's all I can say as far as what they were at. And there was a smell that I can't I can't explain, but there's a different scent as far as that. And I don't know whether it's just my heightened sense. I was at obviously if you're experiencing that kind of terror, your senses are going to be amplified times 10.
I can say. People smell different, women smell different than men. I hate to say it, different races. I hate to say it. Now I'm going to be called, whatever, but people all smell different. So yeah, if you have an alien there, they're going to smell different. Hey, my producer, Kevin, wants to ask you a question here, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's not really a question, but it's actually a theory. It might be a little out of context theory, but it's a theory. Now, what if we came from a different, planet, such as, Mars or something, and we were put here on Earth, You
mean to jumpstart man?
Yeah, and all those picture drawings, from the past, those were, pictures of the people that, brought us here. Oh, snap. This is what I remember. I better write this down.
Right. Well, if you go back, they talk about the Atlantean, Lemurians, et cetera, and of course we have some traces of these races of in Australia. As far as that's completely, the Aboriginals are completely, they're much different looking as far as that. But then again, you have all the, they talk about the, Japanese. You have all these different things, and it's my contention is that they've been seeded from various